building at warp speed.
By Tuesday, this will be able to have intake of illegals.
The backlash.
They're building something that is devastating to us from a humanitarian standpoint.
What a slap in the face this is to the indigenous tribes.
Migrant detention at the airport in the Everglades. The facts and the fallout.
A serious discussion of whether or not this would constitute cruel and unusual punishment.
They have to do reviews. They have to look before they leave.
The race is on.
And I've never been more ready to take on the corrupt and powerful.
The politics of prosecution. The Miami Democrat looking to unseat the Attorney General right here, live. 4 years since catastrophe in Surfside.
The tests have been amazingly successful and insightful.
Their search for answers, plus a new state law.
Financial relief for condo owners.
I mean, we're certainly not looking at bailing people out.
A lawmaker taking the lead, a lead investigator unearthing answers, both with us live. The big news of the week and the newsmakers all live this week in South Florida. Good morning. Welcome. Great to have you here. As we come on the air today, the Migrant Detention Center going up with warp speed in the Everglades is set to open in 48 hours. Protesters and now a lawsuit aim to stop that process. State contractors are building the temporary detention center at the Training and Transitional Airport, owned and operated by Miami-Dade County, though it is located just over the Collier County line at the edge of Big Cypress National Preserve. The governor took control of the property under an emergency order he signed 2.5 years ago, declaring illegal migration to Florida a crisis, as Miami-Dade's mayor addressed this week.
The state has exercised the executive powers that the governor has exerted through his executive order, and so they have moved forward.
They did. They're building the temporary housing, self-contained waste tanks, administrative and migrant processing areas, all according to the governor's office. Another such facility is in the planning stages, apparently at Camp Blanding in Clay County. Project's state numbers for the migrant detention, the projected numbers, about $500 million for 5,000 people. And the messaging looks like a key part of that plan. The governor debuted the site Friday morning live with a supportive national cable news crew.
This is going to be able to have more than 3,000 illegals can be processed through here. We've got a massive runway right behind us where any of the federal assets that they want to fly these people back to their home country, they can do it one-stop shop.
Before that, the governor's former chief of staff and is currently his appointed attorney general, James Uthmeyer, first posted a video branding the detention center Alligator Alcatraz.
This 30 square mile area is completely surrounded by the Everglades. Presents a efficient, low-cost opportunity to build a temporary detention facility because you don't need to invest that much in the perimeter. People get out, there's not much waiting for them other than alligators and pythons. Nowhere to go, nowhere to hide.
And with that branding comes the swag. The Republican Party of Florida is fundraising off the migrant detention in the Everglades with shirts, with baseball caps, etc. This weekend's protests at the gates of the airport are the latest of several this week. Concerns about the environmental effects seem to dominate the opposition. Tribal residents there consider that land sacred ground.
What we're doing right now is criminal, in my opinion.
I think they're going to do what they want to do regardless of how many people speak out, how angry and loud people become. They're very determined to carry out this plan.
Plans to put migrant detention in the Everglades launched just after state lawmakers ended session. By all accounts, none of them was involved in the plan. State Senate Democrats sent a list of questions to the Attorney General wanting details about detainees' due process, their care and shelter, environmental concerns, funding, and other issues. Hours later, a coalition of environmental groups filed a lawsuit asking the courts to stop the process. And in that complaint, they allege Plans for a detention center did not go through federal environmental reviews nor public comment as required by law. The governor defends the detention center as a necessary staging operation for mass deportations, he wrote, located at a pre-existing airport that will have no impact on the surrounding environment. At the table today, Tania Galloni is the managing attorney for the Florida Office of Earth Justice. That's one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. And joining us via Zoom is State Senate Minority Leader Lori Berman. Her office sent that list of questions to the Attorney General. Welcome, Leader Berman. Welcome. I'm so happy that you're here and you're there, that we can talk about this. And I just want to say, you are part of the opposition. We did invite Attorney General James Uthmeier, other people involved in this process. They declined. Our intention today is to look at the facts, look at this very objectively to see what's going on. Lori Berman, let me start with you. And your questions that you sent to Attorney General Uthmeier looks like they revolve around with a whole host of funding and safety and security. Outline what you want to know.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on this morning. You know, this is a rush to delegitimize law-abiding immigrants who are here in the country. We all heard that President Trump was going to deport criminals. We are not seeing that. We are seeing the ICE agents go to immigration centers, they're going to Home Depot, and they're picking up our neighbors and our friends, the people who are picking our agricultural products, our crops. They're picking up people who are in our construction industry and in our hotel industry. And they are doing it in a manner where we don't know if they're getting due process. And this very hastily put together center in the Everglades violates so many of the requirements that we would want to assure are happening in the country. We know that this is really just a political theater type of event where they're trying to get attention on this issue, when really we should be focusing on things like affordability in the state of Florida, and instead of building this almost $500 million center in the middle of the Everglades.
So I hear your argument, and the larger argument on the immigration policies certainly plays a part in all of this. I'm hoping to focus just on this plan today, and certainly your point about a rush to judgment. I think the governor would actually, not to judgment, a rush to action. The governor would agree with you. He wants this warp speed. I am not here to defend or oppose, but I have been doing reporting on this, and certainly they in the DeSantis administration want to supplement the president's hardline immigration law. He's very open about that, and that's what this is a part of. Earth Justice and a host of other organizations filed this lawsuit mainly on environmental concerns. And one of the interesting points you have in the lawsuit is that it has not gone through legal federal process as a piece of property in the Everglades. Expand on that if you would.
Absolutely, and thank you for having us. We represent Friends of the Everglades, and Friends of the Everglades was founded precisely because of an attempt to develop this area. And the National Environmental Policy Act grew out of this and said, no, before you're going to launch a massive federal project, you need to go through environmental review. You need to assess the impacts that is going to have on the affected environment. And you have to give the public an opportunity to comment, to understand what the plan is. And these are all required by federal law. None of that happened here.
So how does that play when we're talking? And Leader Berman, please feel free. I know on Zoom it's difficult. Please feel free to join this conversation. We're talking about developing in the Everglades, and yet we're looking at a development in the Everglades. There is an airport there. I think some media outlets called it a defunct airport, but not according to the county. The county says that there are thousands of touch and goes there, airplanes that come in. It's a 10,000-foot runway. It can accommodate large commercial jets. So square how this is development when there's already development there.
I think the important thing to recognize is that under county law, this is authorized for an extremely limited use. It is a training facility, and yes, there is a single runway because that's where development stopped when the public cried with outrage decades ago over the plan to build a massive facility there. Well, now we have a massive facility that's in the works. A mass detention center that could house up to 5,000 people cost $500 million a year.
My understanding is that the 5,000 number is statewide, not for this property. But you heard the governor say 3,000. I'm not sure. I just want to be factual there.
Either way, we are talking about thousands of people and all of that. All that brings, not to mention the personnel required to operate the facility day in and day out. It's a complete transformation of that site, not the limited use for which it was intended.
Leader Berman.
Yes, and then you have the issue of how safe is this facility going to be? They're using the same kind of temporary housing that we use for after a hurricane. You're putting the facility in the middle of the Everglades at the very beginning of hurricane season. I mean, think about it. What could go wrong? Obviously, many things could go wrong. You're putting temporary housing. You're putting people out there in extreme heat situations. So just in terms of the actual facility itself, it raises a lot of questions about how we're going to be treating the people who are staying at that facility.
Yeah. Do you, our reporting shows that there is an evacuation plan in the event of a storm, much like the logistics that we've seen look like a template of logistics for mass temporary housing, not necessarily something for migrant detention. And so, Florida, the state of Florida, does this. Would you feel better knowing that there are safety and evacuation plans in place? Because so much is unknown, which is part of the problem.
I mean, there should be safety and evacuation plans in place, but I still don't feel comfortable. We're putting it in an area where there's flooding, where there's extreme heat. We're putting people's lives at risk by putting them in the middle of this area. And, the fact that they're calling it Alcatraz is even more disturbing. I mean, they're commercializing the merchandise and saying that this facility, using it to fundraise. And I think we're forgetting the humanity here. These are human beings. These are people who are, working to make a better life for themselves here in America. And we're commercializing everything, and we're using this alliterative name as basically a publicity stunt. And the whole thing from start to finish has been done under emergency powers. An emergency is when you have a sudden and unexpected event. This is not an emergency right now, and I don't understand why we're doing it other than as a publicity stunt.
The publicity component of it is certainly very obvious. Florida passed, I know you didn't vote for this, but Florida earlier this year, the governor signed a raft of new immigration laws making state law for what is a federal jurisdiction issue. This comes under that. Are you thinking that there is more legal opposition to come?
I do believe there could be more legal opposition. There should be some challenges. I'd also like to see maybe us tighten up the state definition of emergency. As you mentioned at the start, this was an emergency declared in 2023. We did change the law in Florida now. Every 60 days, the emergency has to be renewed, but I'd like to see us maybe tighten up what is an emergency. When you look at the Department of Emergency Management website, most of the emergencies are hurricane related, weather related, flooding, COVID related. So I really feel like this is a pretext for them to be able to seize land and create this facility when it's not a true emergency.
In the 30 seconds or so we have left, where is the lawsuit? You've asked for an emergency opinion because it looks like this opens Tuesday.
Right. We've asked the judge to rule by Tuesday to put a stop before people are transferred there for all of the reasons that have been raised, and we've asked for an immediate hearing.
And you'll let us know.
Absolutely.
Tania Galloni, great to have you at the table. Leader Lori Berman, keep in touch. Great to have you weigh in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, the former state lawmaker who paired suits and rubber boots is stepping into a new role, candidate for Florida Attorney General. Jose Javier Rodriguez is right here to get into it all, up next.
Florida needs somebody in its court, and I've never been more ready to take on the corrupt and powerful, to make life in Florida safer and less expensive.
Now candidate to be Florida's top prosecutor, Jose Javier Rodriguez has worn many political hats, though also boots. His footwear in the state capitol during the 2018 and 19 legislative sessions to draw attention to sea level rise and the need for environmental policy. That work made him a target, and in the 2020 election, evidence shows FP&L and a maze of dark money funded a fake candidate with the same last name to be on the ballot and dupe voters. Jose Javier Rodriguez went on to be Assistant Secretary of Labor. He is now running to be Florida's next Attorney General. Jose Javier Rodriguez, Democrat from Miami, right here at the table with us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yet another hat to put on.
Sure.
So let me talk about the Attorney General's race, a year away.
Sure.
But so much in the headlines, unlike that when Ashley Moody was the Attorney General, it seems, because James Othmeyer, the appointed Attorney General at the moment, puts himself out there for publicity on a lot of things he's doing and also has been in the news for some controversy. Is this sort of a good time for you to jump in the race? Is the timing good?
Well, you know, I think the reason why I'm running is that I want to serve as the people's lawyer for Florida. We haven't had an attorney general who has fulfilled that job in some time. So my priority.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that?
Well, listen, and I'll talk about some of my priorities, and I'll try to make that clear because, so first of all, you know, my priorities, if elected as attorney general, is first of all to keep us safe, right? Keep our kids safe, tackle the opioid crisis. Also to deal with the affordability crisis, right? The Attorney General's office has not been used to give us relief from, for example, the insurance situation here, right? With property insurance, to give homeowners some relief, to tackle all the corruption in Tallahassee that leads to fee increases and all kinds of costs being shifted onto us.
Okay, let's dive into that a little bit. You allege corruption in Tallahassee. How?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, when in my experience, so my entire career has been about sticking up for the little guy, right? As a lawyer, you know, representing workers who've been cheated out of their wages. As a legislator, fighting some of the most powerful interests in Tallahassee, right? You know, sticking up for condo owners, sticking up for students. And, you know, you mentioned in the beginning, standing up to polluters who are also trying to shift the costs for cleaning up that pollution and for some of the things that they're doing onto us taxpayers, right? And so those were a lot of the fights that I fought then. And so when I'm talking about corruption, I'm talking about that kind of corruption. And we need somebody looking out for us in Tallahassee because that's not what we have. It's not what we've had.
I think from the public-facing Attorney General's office right now, when we see them call press conferences, it's about drug busts, child protection. Would that be a priority for you?
Absolutely, but I think it would be a priority. But rather than focusing on the press conferences, right, it would be try to make sure that we are actually supporting law enforcement, giving them the tools that they need and supporting those efforts and providing the coordinating leadership that frankly we just haven't had. You know, we have press conferences, but we don't have the type of leadership and coordination out of his office that we need.
Let's talk about the headline of certainly this program and so much during the week, the detention center in the Everglades. Attorney General is part of the cabinet and now also part of the newly formed Immigration Enforcement Board that the state has. As Attorney General, you would be upholding the laws of the state of Florida, defending them.
That's right.
And the law of the state of Florida right now is a very hard line on immigration, deportation, and delving into what used to be federal, still is federal jurisdiction in a state legal mode. How would you handle that, upholding those laws that you don't agree with?
That's a great question because it goes to what the job of the Attorney General is. Yeah. And again, I would say that we haven't seen a real Attorney General for some time. The Attorney General's job is to look out for the people of Florida, right? It is not the general counsel to the governor. It is not acting, you know, like you're, you know, just trying to get headlines for, you know, by saying sensational things, right? And so the approach that I would have when it comes to immigration is, we have to enforce the law. We have to enforce the border, we have to enforce immigration laws, but also a very American thing is to treat people with dignity and respect, and to respect the process. And so as Attorney General, you don't get to decide what the law is. If as Attorney General I believe a law is unconstitutional, I would take that to the court for them to decide. That has not been the attitude of the DeSantis administration or this Attorney General.
Just so I understand clearly, you would take what is now state law to court?
If I believe that it is unconstitutional, right?
Do you believe that?
I haven't reached an opinion, but because again, courts have decided these things, right? It's part of why Uthmeier was held in contempt, right? Because of preliminary rulings by a judge about the constitutionality of a state statute related to trying to enforce immigration law was invalidated, and he couldn't find it within himself to tell law enforcement what the law was. He was on both sides of the issue.
The federal judge put a stay on one of the state laws, and she believes violated that stay.
Correct, right.
So I want to talk about when you ran for re-election. We covered that extensively in 2020. You had a shill candidate in your race with your name. You lost by 32 votes. It appeared to work. And then subsequently, reporting found that behind that shill candidate were entities that wanted you out of office, dark money, including Florida Power and Light, because you were an environmental promoter. I'm not putting words in their mouth, that you were that, and they were mad at you. Here's my question. Will FP&L and other utilities like that be in your crosshairs if you are Attorney General?
Listen, my message as Attorney General, if you are dangerous, if you are taking advantage of people, I don't care if you're rich and powerful, I'm coming for you. That's my message. And so, I was not afraid of, FPL and frankly, Big Sugar back then, and I would not be as Attorney General. But the job of the Attorney General, again, is to look out for the best interests of the people of Florida. It is not to carry out vendettas. There is nothing personal here. But when you look at what's happening, FPL currently is coming in for the biggest rate hike apparently in the history of the United States, right? They're asking for
Did you research that? Is that true?
I say apparently because that's what's been reported. I don't personally.
It's big. It's huge. It's their biggest.
No, not their biggest. Apparently, it's the biggest ever of any utility, investor-owned utility, and they're asking for $1.6 billion, right? And so again, from my vantage point in Tallahassee, insurance companies, those who seek to raise our rates, they get away with whatever they want with very little scrutiny, almost none.
So, I mean, to your point, the rate deciders is the public PSC, Public Service Commission.
Public Service Commission.
They decide. The public counsel who sits with them has actually opined against it. But how do you get past the body that decides that as Attorney General?
The Attorney General has broad powers, right? Broad constitutional powers, broad common law powers. If I were Attorney General, I'd be prepared to use them, the investigatory powers, and filing lawsuits if necessary, because the Office of Attorney General at the state level in our country is a very old office, right? It goes way back to the founding of our country, and the purpose of the office is to look out for the people of Florida and the state, right? And I would be prepared to use those powers to do everything necessary, again, to keep us safe, lower costs, and fight that corruption that is part of what's keeping our costs high.
I hear your platform laid out. We have a long year ahead. I am really hoping that you come back here with whoever is going to be running against you, and it looks like James Uthmeier, have a debate right here at this table. I would welcome that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. What? Go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say I'd love to hear. We're talking. I was at this Everglades detention center yesterday, right? And raising so many of the legal questions, but also so many of the financial questions. We're going to be stuck with cleaning up this gigantic mess that's really just a political theater for Washington.
I know that is a take, and there's a lot of unknowns, and there's also that whole other side of the story. Again, we have a long year ahead, and I welcome you back as often as we can.
Would love that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. Turning to the catastrophic collapse of Champlain Tower South 4 years ago this week continues to be an agent of change. A stunning new update on that investigation into the cause is just ahead. But first, a new law the governor signed days ago may help condo owners deal with financial fallout. State Representative Vicki Lopez sponsored that legislation, and she is right here to break it down next. Signed into law this week, 2 bills meant to help condo owners bear a financial burden. The building safety laws passed after the Surfside collapse 4 years ago this week upended plans and budgets for countless condo owners, especially in older buildings. The new laws that go into effect on Tuesday address that and a roster of association rules. It's big. State Representative Vicki Lopez, Republican from Miami, is one of the sponsors right here with us today. You know, it is a huge bill. We do not have time to talk about every little part of it, but the financial part is the big kahuna. How does this help people financially without compromising the safety components, and there are a lot of those in the original bills?
Correct. So, I mean, I think the first and most important part of the legislation is now allowing for, in lieu of reserves, for condominium associations to actually take out credit lines. And there's some pretty strict guardrails on that as well.
But could they not to begin
They could
with?
not before, no. They had to reserve. And so let's break that down. So most condo associations, if prior to this law passing, were going to have to increase monthly condo fees because reserves, new reserves that had never been reserved for before, were now mandatory.
Which were structural deficiencies, maintenance.
Correct.
Well, it was all kicked down the
yes.
line.
So for years, many of the buildings, waived reserves because the law permitted it. But what happened? We have very old buildings not built to code, and if they weren't properly maintained, we're now in danger of being structurally unsound.
I want to challenge the narrative because it sounds like a really good plan, but taking out lines of credit, it has inherent scary parts, especially if the people involved, the condo owners, are not the ones to decide that.
They have to decide that. By a mandatory vote of the majority of the voting interests. But here's the issue that I say: it's either pay now or pay later. I want to make sure that people understand, just because you're getting a credit line, it does mean that you won't have to reserve because you're going to have the money there when you need it, right? However, when you need it, you're going to take out a loan, which is probably going to result in a special assessment. So I think this is giving temporary relief, if you will.
I think that's a very important point because this was lauded as, oh, finally, the good bills passed and we pay the consequences, and now this is relief. But it is temporary relief.
It is temporary.
It's not a sugar-coated thing.
But quite frankly, one that most people need because they need to be able to make decisions. Do I stay? Do I go? Associations have to decide. If this is a 60-year building and it hasn't been maintained and it isn't built to code, imagine once you get to the milestone inspection that you may have very large special assessments. People need to have time to make decisions. So, this will give it to them.
Okay, so this goes to sort of a larger, maybe unintended consequences of making condos legally much safer for much longer. And that is this, developers are looking to buy up condos. They are. And, no shade to developers whatsoever, but for the condo owner who may not have means, who may be, their retirement home, has very little option when developers come in and just start buying up the building.
Well, they do it in two
unit
ways.
By unit.
They do that. That's like creating a bulk sale, right?
Yeah.
They start to pick up all the units, and soon they are the majority interest.
Exactly.
Right. Or there's another way. Condo associations decide with the owners, right? Because there has to be a vote to terminate condominiums. That we're going to solicit developer proposals, and we'll take the best one out there, right? So now that isn't always the case because remember, developers are looking for location, location, location. So that works for those that are on the coastal line, right, near the water. If you're inland, I don't know how many developers want to come in and buy your condo.
Yet.
True.
So, all right. So this, bottom line, this goes into effect Tuesday.
It does.
And are banks, for the financing component, are banks part of this? Have they bought into good terms? And
it's a good question, right? Different banks, different capital markets may have very different decisions to make. The question will remain, right? First of all, they have to have a structural integrity reserve study. The credit line must be in the same amount as that would have been required to be reserved. Now the question is there enough equity? Do the banks want to take a risk with buildings that are very, very old? That I do not know.
So there's a chance that this may be very difficult.
It may be.
For some condos.
Maybe, depending. Again, if the condominium is in really good shape, maintenance-wise and structurally, maybe not. You know what I'm saying? This is all going to be we're going to have to see how the law gets implemented and what the issues are. But I believe that we will be at this again next year because there are other issues related to condominiums. And, you know, obviously you noticed that this bill is big. It touches on governance issues as well.
Yeah.
Look, how many people in South Florida don't even live in their condominium, right? The unit itself.
Right.
And yet they've been disenfranchised from voting. So now we're going to have some electronic voting that's going to be required.
The bill is right there online for anybody who wants to read it. Absolutely, always. And we'll talk more about that before we run out of time. The governor signed another one of your bills this week, Lucy's Law.
He did.
Lucy's family has been talking about it on social media. Lucy died in a boat crash, 2022, and this is a boating safety law in her name. All good things in the bill for boating safety. Let's talk about the crash 3 years ago. You have called for a reopen investigation under the sort of things bubbling up into the public consciousness that Fish and Wildlife Commission, who was the lead investigator, didn't really do enough due diligence and let the boat operator kind of skate. What do you know?
So what I know is what's been reported from depositions, right? I mean, the trial, George Pino's trial has not begun yet.
The boat operator.
The boat
who
operator.
Is a connected developer, which is why this question has arisen. Was he let off the hook?
Yeah, and we cannot answer that. Obviously, a court of law is going to answer a lot of this.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer in that we have to let the process go by. But from what we now know, there certainly is cause to be concerned about how this investigation was, in fact, conducted. And it is hard for me to understand how four highly trained officers from FWC would not have followed their own protocol, right? Like it just seems odd. If it had been one, maybe, but all four of them, and listen, you can make a mistake that evening, right? But once you know that Lucy has passed away the following morning and that Kathy Puig, the other young woman, is in serious condition, you should go back and reclassify the category of the body camera footage as not incidental, but death and serious bodily injury, which would have kept then the evidence. And I quite frankly say this to both sides of the party. Every party deserves to have had the evidence presented in court. Sure. And I would think that the operator, as much as the family of the two young girls that have suffered mostly, would want to have evidence. I don't understand this notion that we wouldn't want to make sure that justice is served. And for Melly and Andy Fernandez, trust me, it is a fight that I'm in with them. I want justice served here.
Vicki Lopez, you are just involved in all kinds of things as a state lawmaker. Always value your time and value your insights here at the table. Come back soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.
It was a pleasure.
All right, next, the most focused findings to date on how and why Champlain Tower South collapsed. The co-lead on that investigation is with us next. As our community marked 4 years this week since we lost 98 neighbors in that catastrophic Surfside building collapse, the scientists and engineers investigating it all released the most definitive findings to date. The team from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, the federal agency that investigates building failures, they meticulously rebuilt full-scale sections of Champlain Towers to replicate what caused that collapse.
We grabbed a portion of the test specimen that represented the pool deck. Then we monitored how failure of the pool deck would weaken the connections of the tower. We forced it to fail in a way that we think might have happened on that day when the building collapse occurred.
This week's findings by no means the end. The investigative work is still underway, likely for another year. One of the co-leads on the case is Glenn Bell, right here with us today. Glenn, it is great to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we were talking a little bit to prepare for our interview, and you were talking about how the key takeaway to all of this, I mean, for the better part of this 4 years, our community has been focused on that pool deck collapsing, but the takeaway that you have now is that there were so many other points of failure, so many other problems. Headline that for us, if you would.
Yeah, our investigations revealed that there were a number of issues throughout not only the pool deck structure, but in the tower itself. And these largely related to shortcomings in the original structural design and deviations in the construction from the requirements of the design documents in the contractor's contract. And these existed from the time construction of Champlain Towers was complete, more than 40 years before the collapse. They represent, in total, many potential points of vulnerability that could possibly have been the initiating location or the trigger that started the collapse. And we are in the process of chasing all these down. We're making good progress, but it's been a lot of work, a lot of painstaking work.
The minutia of it all is just mind-boggling, how you replicated entire life-size sections of the building. I want to run some of the new video that NIST put out this week of the pool deck as it actually started to crack. And for so many years, we've known about sort of this portion of the investigation. This is, you see the cracks right now coming apart real time on that morning. What is it that happened that you know after that you've just found? Or was that the initiation now that you've studied it this far?
Well, we are zeroing in on the initiation, but we still have possibilities both in that pool deck, and that's one of our likely scenarios, but the tower itself that we're chasing down.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? The video that we just saw was actually what you built, the replica. We were watching the replica, life-size replica of what you built to replicate the collapse. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
I can't see the video. I think it's probably the portion that shows a portion of the pool deck breaking away from some columns. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yes, okay. So that represents a portion of the structure where the pool deck joined the tower. And it's a very complicated and problematic location because the slabs in the pool deck and the exterior and the interior of the building were at different heights. And so you had this complex geometry where these two floors joined, where there were columns of the tower as well. And part of the problems with that joint was that it mixed some lower strength floor concrete with some higher strength column concrete, which was a bit of a mismatch, and also that there was some reinforcing lacking in that very deep joint there. That is both for us a hypothesis about the initiator of the failure, but also the progression of the failure as it may have started in the pool deck. And what that test is simulating, and what you see in the video here, is the portion of the pool deck which has a piece of slab and beam tearing away from that joint. And what we're testing there is what happens to that joint after the pool deck tears away, because it takes, as you can see from the video, a large chunk of concrete and does a lot of damage to that joint. And we're testing to see what happens to that joint after the failure, and that's one of our primary locations where we suspect the pool deck collapse was allowed to progress into the tower.
You know,
once it gets into the tower, it can spread in many locations because of some of the vulnerabilities of the structure.
Understood. And what I was going to mention was the fact that you say what you're finding, you've learned, was baked into not only the design, but the build 40 years ago. You know, people living in condos about that age or older right now have to be looking at this and listening to what you're finding and really worrying about what the buildings they are living in. Is that something that you're looking at?
Well, Certainly, this is one of the key questions of the investigation here. Our purpose here is not to find fault, but rather to make recommendations for improving practices. And our recommendations, which are going to be weighty and they're going to be very extensive, and they're going to have extensive impact, will address questions about quality control and quality assurance in design and construction, and how we maintain and the safety of existing buildings.
Yeah,
So
I
that
mean,
will be baked into our recommendation.
your work, and I know we here in South Florida have been watching it for 4 years. I'm not sure nationally they are as focused on this, but your work, as meticulous as it has to be and as long as it has been going on, has the potential to change building codes nationwide. I mean, you are that source.
There's no question, and this is why we're being so rigorous and meticulous about the work that we're doing. We have to get this right, because if we miss something or we come up with the wrong conclusion, the impact of our recommendations won't be what they need to be. And that would be a tragedy on top of a tragedy. But we fully expect that our recommendations will impact not only new construction, but also have a lot to do with how we maintain the existing safety of buildings that are already built. And this will be not only in South Florida, but it will have impact around the country. We're sure. We know a lot of eyes outside the United States on what we're doing, and they're looking to see what our findings will be as well.
The monumental task that you have, I want to show some video that NIST had released of the parts of the building all marked that you had to replicate, that you've laid out in a warehouse to study. You know, some of the things that you are looking at are not only the pieces of the building, but the actual concrete, the actual materials that you've had to sort of reverse engineer. I mean, speak to the intensity of this effort.
Well, we were able to retrieve a lot with based on the cooperation and the collaboration with first responders on the site, but close to 700 pieces of the structure, the superstructure as well as the below grade elements, foundations, and so forth. And you see those laid out in the warehouse there. Those have turned out to be key to our investigation, in part because there is basically almost no existing documentation that we've been able to find of the original design and construction of the building. We found original design documents, but nothing else. And this has meant to us that in order to go back and reconstruct the conditions that existed in the building before the failure, we've had to meticulously go through documents and conduct interviews and so forth, but also to go through those 700 or so specimens and understand the as-built conditions, where the reinforcing was, what the dimensions were. We extracted samples of concrete from those specimens so we could understand the strength and properties and the condition of the concrete. And we used all of that detailed information in order to recreate these replicas.
I just want to let everyone know, because our time television segment is running low. I thank you so much, and I want everyone to know you can follow all of this latest on our website. Glenn Bell from NIST, what you are talking about and all of the things that NIST has done and continues to investigate is going to be right there, nist.gov/Champlain. You have it on your website, which is pretty easy. We like to make it even easier. We have it on our website, local10.com, so everyone can follow this. And please do come back when you have other things to reveal that you're finding. So fascinating.
We will.
Thanks so much.
We're very keen to get our word out. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. And we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Links to all the interviews are online, local10.com, right there at that QR code. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. Have a beautiful day, and definitely keep in touch.